Wir sind jetzt ein bisschen hinter den Kulissen auf der Worldcon mit zwei Füchsen, also mit zwei Fuchs von Fantasy Productions. Einmal Werner
Hallo?
und einmal Corinna.
Hallo.
Und wir erwarten einen Autor, den ihr schon länger vertretet und mit dem ihr zusammengearbeitet habt. Ich glaube, ein paar Leute kennen ihn. Wie heißt der?
George R. Martin. Ich glaube, fast 70% von den Leuten hier kennen den. Wenn nicht 99,5.
Okay, wir werden mit dem gleich ein bisschen reden, über seine Bücher, auch über andere Bücher. Und ihr habt auch für ihn was mitgebracht, eine Überraschung, richtig?
Genau, das wird aber noch nicht verraten, aber es ist ein kleines Geschenk, das kommt von uns persönlich und wir sind der Überzeugung, dass er sich sehr darüber freuen wird.
Wir werden es jetzt sehen. So, thank you very much for joining us, and I have to say this is the best George R. Martin costume I have seen so far in this con.
Yes, I've been role-playing for many years, and getting the costume right is important.
If you ever met the real George R. Martin, what would you ask him?
I could make an answer to that, but it would get me in trouble. I think I'll skip that one.
Okay, now that we have that out of the way, and we're not going to talk about a certain book and a certain title, I want to talk about the role-playing you just brought up. So,
Sure.
yeah, because you are a role player, and as far as I know, the new series that's coming out based on wild cards, that used to be a role-playing session you had.
Right. Well, I wasn't always a role player. When it started in the United States with Dungeons and Dragons, I did not get swept up with that. I remember it had been around for a few years, and I was invited to play in a Dungeons and Dragons game. And it seemed sort of stupid to me. They were a bunch of people met in a tavern, and then they went into a dungeon, and in every room there was a different monster. It was, it didn't intrigue me. So I never played a second game of that. But then when I moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, I was invited to join a role-playing group. That was headed by people like Walter John Williams, who's the guest of honor here, and Melinda Snodgrass, Victor Milan, a lot of the local writers. And they had moved long past Dungeons and Dragons into more interesting role-playing games. And they were all also very creative personalities. So there was very little rolling of dice and killing of monsters. It was, everybody created these marvelous characters, and it was almost like an improv theater where people were playing their characters and having fun with each other. They were playing a couple science fiction games, and then the one that really took hold for a while was Call of Cthulhu. And of course, I grew up with H.P. Lovecraft. I love Lovecraft's work, so it was a lot of fun to, be investigators playing in the 1890s or 1920s, or a couple different settings, and finding the various dark cults and Azathoth and Nyarlathotep and the other Lovecraftian monsters. So we played that for a while, and that was really the thing that got me hooked. But I was also a comic book fan. I'd been reading comic books since I was very young, and my first published work had been in comic book letter columns in Fantastic Four and Avengers. And some of the people in the group knew that. So one year for my birthday, Victor Milan gave me a copy of a superhero role-playing game called Superworld and said, "Here, you've been playing in a game, why don't you actually run a game, run this superhero game for us?" And I took that for a challenge, and I did. And it almost destroyed my life and career. It became totally addictive. We started playing once a week, and then pretty soon we were playing twice a week and 3 times a week. And then we had 2 campaigns going on in different cities, in Santa Fe and Albuquerque. Sometimes I'd drive down, sometimes the players would drive up. And we would play all night. I mean, I was younger then, and we'd get together for dinner, and then we'd start playing, and we'd still be playing at like 4 in the morning. And then after we stopped that session, we'd rehash the game that we just played until the sun was coming up. We did this for like a year. And during that year, I wrote nothing. I just created a lot of villains to throw at the people in the group. But I finally said, we have to figure out a way to make some money out of this. And we had created some wonderful characters, super characters. And I decided it was the 80s, it was the mid-80s, and shared world anthologies were very trendy. They were very popular. The first one was Thieves' World by Robert Asprin and Lynn Abbey. And that had been so successful, it spawned a lot of imitations like Leovac and Ithcar, Heroes in Hell, War World, all these shared worlds going. But no one had done a superhero shared world. So we created Wildcards as the first superhero shared world. And oddly enough, once we started writing stories about Wildcards, including many of the same characters from the Superworld game, we stopped playing Superworld. So the fiction almost took over. And that was 30 years ago. So Wildcard is celebrating its 30th anniversary now. 23 books in print, 4 more originals in the pipeline. We've had Wildcard comic books. We're developing a Wildcard TV series. And oddly enough, everything being circulated has been a Wildcard role-playing game. So, yes, so that's pretty much my history with role-playing.
Okay, something you have in common with Werner, who started off a big part of his career also creating role-playing games. So, is that the only thing you have in common? I think you have a lot of shared history.
We do, yes. At the same time, as George worked for Indirection Wildcards, I was busy writing Das Schwarze Auge, The Dark Eye, which is called in America now. A new edition is coming out, or is out already. And so we did, without knowing about each other's pastimes, the same thing.
Yeah, just a little less superheroes, more fantasy in your case.
That's true. Less superheroes, but our fantasy characters were superhuman as well sometimes. But we knew each other at that time for quite a while. We hadn't seen each other. I think the first time we met was in The Hague in 1990, but
right.
we had exchanged a lot of letters because in 1974 my agency Uto Prop wrote a letter to a certain George R.R. Martin, back then in, what was it, Chicago?
Chicago, initially, yes. I was living in Chicago just a few years out of college. I'd written a number of short stories, hadn't done a novel yet, just short stories. And Werner and his colleagues in Udo Prop, there were 3 of them, Ron Hahn, Werner, and Hans Joachim Albers, wrote to me and offered to represent me in Germany. I didn't have any agents. I'd never had a foreign sale, so I thought, yeah, why not? I'll give this guy a try, and these 3 guys a try, and they started selling German reprint rights to my short stories, which is something a lot of agents don't want to bother with short stories. I mean, you get $50 for a short story, and the commission is $5, so it's a lot of work to earn $5.
That's right. I can remember the exact sum we got. It was 48 marks and Deutschmarks and 50 Pfennig, which meant it was 4.85 marks for us on our 10% commission.
Yeah.
So we didn't get rich back then.
But yes. They did sell my stories in German, and I think years later when I started writing novels, it helped me in the German market because I was already known from appearances in these various German anthologies and magazines that had come out. I had a little reputation, at least as a popular,
so
yeah.
to say.
Of course, I wasn't the only one. Werner scooped up a lot of the young writers of the 70s who were in the same position as me, short story writers, right. People writing their first novel. At that time, all of the established writers in Germany were represented by, I think, the same guy. So he represented the giants, Heinlein, Asimov, Poul Anderson, Jack Vance, everybody was represented by this guys. And what does he want with George R. Martin or Lisa Tuttle or Howard Waldrop? So Uta Prop.
Bishop we had, and
yeah.
People like almost the same age as us, so we were in the same position. We wanted to break through, as writers, but it was almost impossible in Germany because the market was constricted, and only Perry Roden was a possible market, but we didn't want to write for that. So George came up with his first novel in 1977, and it was first published in analog as a serial, and I translated that novel, and it came out by Drömer Knauer in 1978. The line was run by Hans-Joachim Alpers, who had made that jump into professionality, and I was the translator for it. 2 years later, I would run the line myself. He had moved on to better grounds, greener pastures, so to say, and I began working for Drömer Knauer, and that was a nice thing because a few years later, when DSA, Das Schwarze Auge, was written, we could get that whole role-playing world, we could sell it to Drömer Knauer and later to Schmidt, who went with them as companions in the gaming market.
Okay, that's a lot of cross connections. Getting a foot into the German market, and you getting a foot in with Drömer Knauer, and then producing.
Okay. So you're the people absolutely first in line. When did you arrive to manage this?
10 a.m.
10 a.m. Okay.
Same.
So you've been waiting now for how many hours? It's now
2 hours, I think so.
When did you start queuing today?
3 hours ahead.
How long do you still have to wait?
It's probably 1 hour 3/4. Starts at 2.
You did bring a puppet of George R. R. Martin. Did you make it yourself?
I made it with my friend.
Okay. And what can it do? It's like a Muppet. You can move it.
Yes.
Where's his book? You have to put the book on because we have now the first copy of The Winds of the Winter.
Did you sign that copy?
Yes.
Oh, show me, please. Oh, this is great. How did he react? What did he say?
He laughed.
Okay, I bet. Okay. So, what did you have to sign?
I had 2 things, but I could only get one sign, so that's it.
Okay. So, thank you very much, and enjoy the con. And this is brilliant.
And we signed the picture of Daenerys Targaryen, and now we have Daenerys with the sign of Grandmaster R.R. George Martin.
How do you feel? Are you happy?
Yes, we are happy. It was a very long line to him, about 2 hours, so we finished the quest.
It means a lot because, you know, he's an icon, he's internationally acclaimed, and basically all his work is excellent, lovely. You get attached to the characters, you feel emotional, and he's just phenomenal. We knew he was going to be here, so about a year ago when I booked up, and it was the closest to UK, so if it was in America it'd be hard work. So we're here, we made it.
It's really rare that he's in here in Finland. Like, he's been here before, but I was too young to travel here in South. I'm from northern Finland, so I'm really lucky.
Now, a jump to the 90s. George had been in Hollywood writing for
Twilight Zone, Beauty and the Beast, developing shows of my own, which unfortunately never got on the schedule, but yeah. But then I decided to return to books after about 10 years away from them, and started writing this fantasy series that eventually became known as A Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah, that was and it was first presented in '96, right? And you got one copy and read it on the way back to Germany. At the moment,
not all of the book, but parts of it. I think I got to the scene where Brandon is dropped by Jamie from the tower. But I think that's 100 pages into the book.
Something like that.
Something like that, and I would say that is pretty good for a flight, even if it's a transatlantic flight. I was hooked by it after 2 pages.
Okay, and just Shirley, did you feel back then that this was going to be something that could be really big? What did your instinct say?
My instinct said yes. But I knew George, of course, from his work before that, and I knew that he was a very good author and a very substantial author with the writer's ability to sense what his reading public wants.
Okay, and you sold it to in Germany to Goldman
We
back
tried
then?
to sell it to Heine first because we were very close to them, but Goldman paid the better advance.
I guess Heine is a bit sorry about that by now.
Yes. There is one or the other George Martin title being published by Heine. The Dream Songs was the last one, the 3. Yeah. But of course,
Heine published Wildcards as well. The first 6 books, I think.
Yeah. And it was like 9 or 10 in German, or 11 even.
Right, because they split the books into 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, about different publishers. You sold Song of Ice and Fire to a German publisher, but later, a few years later, you did new versions of the books. Can you, both of you, tell me a little bit about that? How did it come to pass that there are different versions of A Song of Ice and Fire in German?
Well, I mean, Werner obviously knows more about the German market than I do, but with both Wildcards and then with Game of Thrones and the books, they were all divided into smaller books. So evidently, at least at that time, the German market did not want to publish great big giant books like I was writing. Instead they made them into 2 or 3, or I think in one case even 4 smaller books. But that must have changed because now they're coming out with all the parts put together again into books that cover the same ground as they do in English.
It depends on money, of course. Basically, you have 20% more text when you have a German translation. So a novel that is 1,000 pages in the US version will be 1,200 in the German. It becomes more and more problematic to work with those big books, volumes. But then again, printing, I think, has improved over the last 20 years, and though the big German publisher is having one-piece hardcovers as well now.
Okay, but you were the first to do the one-piece versions of A Song of Ice and Fire, and I'm just wondering why the idea came about. Were you kind of saying, I want a version that's different, one that has a better look, one that has the complete book and is not put apart?
Yeah, that's true, but George complained about the cover artwork.
Oh, yes. I have to say, yes, the initial German covers for Wildcards too, with those Heine editions, but then the original covers for A Song of Ice and Fire were not covers commissioned. They did not hire an artist to read the book and pay to cover. Somebody went into the basement where they had a big box of fantasy art lying around and said, "Oh, here's a guy with a sword. Let's put that on the cover." And I think the most infamous one is a cover where there's a big bare-chested Viking kind of guy with an axe, and he's killing wolves. He's fighting wolves. Well, of course, the wolves in my books are good guys. They're protecting the Stark children, and
that appalled you. Be honest.
What is this? Where did they get this cover? So yeah, we do better now.
Yeah. Now they read your books.
Yeah. I'm interested that you actually were kind of keeping up to date with the German versions. Do you also know about the discussions in the German fandom about the translation of your books, about how German the names have become?
Since I don't actually read German, I can't keep up with the discussions, but I know there were issues. The first book in the series, well, Werner translated, my first novel and all that, but he didn't translate these later books. And when we went with Goldman, the first book had one translator, and the second book had a different translator. And when I visited Germany for the first time in 2000, I was guest at a convention in Leipzig, and then I hung around for a month, and Werner took me all over the country to the Essen game show and the Frankfurt Book Fair, and we also visited Berlin and Nuremberg and some other scenic spots. But at the Frankfurt Book Fair, we had a big dinner with my German publisher in which both translators were present. And they got in a big argument with each other, and they were, I didn't know what they were saying, but they were very heated about, down at the end of the table there, about how to properly translate, I think in particular, the names of the castles and the cities was the principal issue.
Yeah, that's true.
And the thing I think about is also about your versions of the books is you retranslate the names to English, you keep it.
Matter of fact is we had 4 volumes out when they changed the terminology, and of course we couldn't go on and have the same terminology as Blanc-Malais, so we retranslated it for the 5th volume, and it's I think about 500-600 nouns that have been retranslated, so it's a lot of work.
You've got a lot of characters. Okay, you're still working together, and we've got one book that's coming out in German in a special version.
This is
That's out already.
This is Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which is a collection of 3 stories I wrote about 2 characters named Dunk and Egg, and they're a hedge knight and his squire about 90 years before A Game of Thrones begins. But this is the art in this one is gorgeous. You see the cover on this, which is I think a beautiful cover, and there's a lot of interior art here, which is all done by Gary Gianni, a marvelous artist who he illustrated the Prince Valiant comic book for years, and he did some beautiful limited editions art of Robert E. Howard's work, Conan, and Solomon Kane, and Bran McMorn. Johnny is an incredible artist, very much in the style of Howard Pyle or N.C. Wyeth, if you know those great illustrators of a previous generation. So it's nice to get the deluxe edition out.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess he actually read the book.
Yes. In fact, it was unusual because we wanted to add a little art to the American edition, and we approached Gary and said, well, we'd like you to do the cover and maybe 5 to 7 color plates. And he read it and said, no, I won't do that. I want to, if I'm going to do it, I want to do like 100 illustrations, not 5 to 7. I want to have illustrations on every other page. And, we'd do like 4 color plates, and then we'll have a lot of black and white interiors. And I was thrilled with this idea. I said, yes, I would love to see that. Well, of course, Gary is a painstaking artist, and he worked on this for like 1.5 years, close to 2 years to do all this art. But what that meant is that some of my foreign publishers were not willing to wait. They had the 3 stories. They had the text of 3 stories. And I said, well, we don't care about the art. We'll just put out the text with the 3 stories. So it was an unusual, a writer who I write in English, of course, and in every other case, the first edition of my book is the American edition, and usually followed closely or sometimes simultaneously by the British edition, the 2 English language editions. And then the translations take some time, so the translations come out 1 year later or 2 years later, or sometimes much longer than that. In the case of Night of the Seven Kingdoms, though, the foreign editions all came out first, while both my American and British publishers were waiting for the artwork to come in. So the artwork finally did come in, and now some of them are redoing the book. So this was actually out earlier in a trade edition from Goldman without the art.
Goldman doesn't have the art edition as of now.
Right.
They will have it perhaps in 2 years.
You've got it now.
But they can't use ours because that's retranslated as well.
Okay, yes.
Sorry for that.
Yes. What else is going to come out as a collaboration? What other books are you going to bring to the market from George in the future?
I have no idea.
Everything he's writing.
Everything.
Everything. Yeah, we would, of course, everything that he's writing, we're going to publish
we
eventually.
are allowed to, we will publish, and all in collector's editions.
Everything that he lets us publish.
Okay.
Your editions are limited editions.
Right.
Yes, that's true.
We're limited, right.
So we
special limited editions.
And I think all the past books are sold out by now, right?
Yeah.
Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
and
Yes,
those
those are sold
yes.
out. We still have some GRRMs.
Right.
They're being resold on eBay for ridiculous amounts.
Yes, you looked it up. It's like when some of them are 800 euros on eBay. So yes.
But that's true with the American first versions as well, or especially the British ones.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
All the Maisha Merlin stuff.
Right.
I have also just a few questions generally as on Worldcon as a con for people who enjoy fantastic worlds and world builders, and we have 2 world builders at the table. Please, many people say if you're a fantasy writer you don't have to do research. Please tell me and everyone else that that's not the case.
Well, bad fantasy writers don't do any research. But I do a great deal of research. I mean, when I wrote my Fever Dream, my vampire novel set on antebellum steamboats in 1857, Mississippi River, I read for like 3 years. I read every book I could get a hold of about the history of that period and the great steamboats and, the whole Mark Twain kind of scenario that existed there. And for Game of Thrones, similarly, I've totally immersed myself in reading histories of the Middle Ages and the Wars of the Roses, the 100 Years' War, the Albigensian Crusade, all of the stuff that I thought I could steal from, because you never know what you're going to need. When you're writing a story and you're immersed in the scene, you don't want to have to stop and say, oh God, I have to look up this fact and then try to look it up. So it's best to have as much knowledge before you begin as you possibly can about the time period and everything. There are fans out there who will call you if you make any mistake. So you have to know about the architecture of castles and, the difference between a trebuchet and a catapult, and between a crossbow and a longbow, and what kind of fabrics they used on medieval clothing, and when the zipper was invented. Hint, not the Middle Ages. And, everything. You never know what you're going to need.
Right.
Absolutely. But experience with writing role-playing stuff comes handy in that.
Yeah. And does it come in handy to be traveling around Germany with and look at castles?
It did. It did. There was some frustrations too. I mean, I remember that trip in 2000, and I think Werner told me a joke once about what do you call someone who speaks 2 languages? Bilingual. What do you call someone who speaks 3 languages? Trilingual. What do you call someone who speaks only 1 language? American. And that is indeed true. I read and write only English, and when we were traveling in places like Nuremberg and some of the other towns, we would go into bookstores and I would see these marvelous books about the German Middle Ages, the Holy Roman Empire and the Interregnum and the Wittelsbach dynasty, all in German, and books that have never been translated into English. And I said, oh, this book probably contains wonderful stuff. So if I draw much more inspiration from English history than from some of these others, it's because there's much more available to me, particularly the period that I'm interested in, which is the Middle Ages. I mean, we have plenty of books about Nazis in English, but I'm not interested in the Nazis. So I'm interested in, Frederick Barbarossa and, Mad King Ludwig and that kind of thing, and the history of these great castles. And that stuff mostly appears only in German.
Funny that you mention it. We have a little present for you.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, okay, you've got a present.
And we hope to remedy a little bit of that.
Okay. You've got it here?
Yeah, we've got it here. We've just to unpack it.
Okay.
But I was thinking about your liking of the German Middle Ages, the German Knights, and the Interregnum we talked about when you visited my place in 2000.
Oh, wow.
So we have something for you, a little something. Almost the same green.
That's right. Comic books.
Comic books. And they're all in German.
Great.
There is 18 of them, and I translated all of them for you.
Oh, wow.
And it's about wolves. The adventure is called The Great Wolf, and unfortunately, some of the wolves are killed, but not too many. But it will be. This is one of my favorite stories when I was 12 years old.
Amazing.
And
this is very cool.
I have the translation down there. It's of course not in a format that is really overwhelming, but I tried my best.
Oh, very cool.
So the panels are indicated so you don't lose direction.
And bingo.
Bingo. You said it.
Bingo. I didn't know that was a German word.
No, that's bingo. That's the sidekick of Falk. And he's an Italian, so some of your ancestry is in that as well. So I hope you have time to read a little bit.
I read all the time, so
I hope it will delight you.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you so much.
Actually, usually I'd wonder if you have the time between all the conventions and working and writing, but if one follows your not blog, one can see that you read a lot. I'm wondering where you find the time, but more interesting, I think, is do you think that it's essential for a writer to also read a lot and read a lot of different things?
I do. That's when young writers ask my advice. There's a lot of things you can say, but the most essential thing is to write every day, because you get better by doing it, and to read voraciously, and to read widely, not just to read. If you're a science fiction fan, that's fine, that's good, but you got to read beyond science fiction. You can't just read one genre or subgenre all the time, even if it is your favorite. You have to read fantasy and historical fiction and mainstream literature and everything, because you can learn from all these things. But even beyond that, I mean, even if I wasn't a writer, I would be a reader. Reading is so much a part of life to me. I mean, I can't imagine not reading. It opens up other worlds and vicarious experiences to you, and really changes you and shapes you and becomes part of you, the books you read.
If you had to decide which like one or two books have had the most impact on you, if you can't even decide or name one of them, what are the names that come up?
Well, certainly Lord of the Rings. I think the books that have most influence on you are the books that you read when you're young. And I encountered Lord of the Rings when I was still in early high school, I think, probably 12 or 13 years of age. And yeah, it had an immense influence on me. And obviously, you know, Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire are heavily influenced by Tolkien, although they are different as well. Robert A. Heinlein, first book I ever read that was not a comic book was one of Robert A. Heinlein's juvenile novels, Have Spacesuit Will Travel, I think probably his best juvenile novel. But that was, I went on to read everything Heinlein ever wrote and went from him to other science fiction authors.
Okay, we have one more thing to maybe add to your stack of things to read, and the reason we brought this is because this is the newest version of Werner's personal world of the Dark Eye that he created. I just thought, here, that's what became of his world. It's the newest version of the game, and it has been translated to English for 2 years now, I think, and this is the description of the world.
Very cool. Heraldry, I love heraldry.
Yes, the people who work on the Dark Eye do love the heraldry too. I think this is just an overview. It's actually a very, very detailed world by now. Werner kicked a lot of it off, but it has grown over the time. His baby.
And are you still doing new adventures and stuff for it?
Yes, there is all the time stuff being issued. How much do you do with DSA? How many are there?
Oh, there's several things coming out each month. Not all of them are adventures, but there's...
It's dozens a year.
Yes.
Very cool.
So he's the father of the biggest German role-playing game, so at least. Okay. I thank you very much for taking the time and sitting down with us, and also Werner and Corinna, and thank you very much, and enjoy the con.
Enjoyed the hell out of it, so.
Okay.
Hopefully I'll come back and visit Germany again in another year or two.
We would all be delighted.
That would be fun.
There's always more castles to look at.
Yeah.
We have a lot of them.
Plenty more, we have so many.
I travel a long way just for George R. R. Martin, but...
Where are you from?
China.
Oh, okay, so you really traveled a long way.
Yes.
This is my only hardback copy, so I brought this, and it weighs so much, and it's so heavy to carry around, but I came from Jyväskylä, so I decided I wanted my best book to be signed by George.
Okay, and what did you bring?
Yes, I booked this class of games. I brought it from China. It's really far away from here. I feel really excited to get this signature. I will keep this all my life. Probably I've given this to my son many years later. Okay, this is a treasure. Keep it.
Okay,
and the first book, Game of Thrones, and this is my bookmark from Wyndham Hotels. Yeah, that's Christopher Hivju playing Tormund. So I am a fan. And I got my autograph. I hope it looks good on camera. Does it? Is it okay? Thank you.
Okay, and you brought?
I just had paper because I don't have the books because I use the library system. So, you know, but I can frame this.
Okay, thank you very much.